Prosecutor Candidate Forum, co-hosted by The Appeal and Now This. I'm Jay Willis, your host for today, senior contributor at The Appeal. So there are two candidates running for Wayne County Prosecutor. Late last month, as our viewers will recall, we had the chance to talk with one of them, the challenger, Victoria Burton Harris. Her opponent, the incumbent prosecutor, Kim Worthy, was also invited to that event, but was unable to attend. She is, however, able to join us today for a part two of sorts. Ms. Worthy began her career at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office in 1984. From 1994 through 2004, she served as a Wayne County Circuit Court Criminal Division Judge. Then in 2004, she was appointed to replace former Wayne County Prosecutor and current Detroit Mayor, Mike Duggan. So just as the case was with part one of this forum, a reminder that hosting it indicates neither support nor opposition to either candidate, Ms. Worthy or Ms. Burton Harris, or their respective positions. With that said, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today. The grave threat that we've seen posed to our communities by COVID-19, particularly to communities of color, has laid bare some of the biggest challenges that this country faces. Combined with the national reckoning over police violence, some profound inadequacies, of the legal system are coming to light, along with real differences of opinion on how to truly pursue justice and equity. So in your time in office, what specific criminal justice policy failings do you think COVID-19 has exposed? And if you were reelected, what would you do to change those policies, or what would you do to change those outcomes? Excuse me. Oh, you're muted this time. We got to unmute.
It's not just what COVID-19 has exposed, it's COVID-19 plus what's happened with George Floyd and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter and police brutality. And I don't know if you know this, but I was a prosecutor in 1993 who prosecuted for 3 months 2 white police officers for beating to death an unarmed Black motorist who was stopped in a bogus traffic stop. And that case still stands as the only case, the first case in American jurisprudence where white police officers that were on duty were convicted of convicted of murder. And so that has laid bare that, and plus COVID-19, and it's exposed not only the racial inequities. Racial inequities don't just rely or lie in the criminal justice system, but with transportation and housing and healthcare and education. And that has been laid bare in Detroit because we have certainly a large number, more than any other ethnic group of African Americans dying from COVID-19. And if you look at those zip codes where they're dying in Detroit, that's also where there's the highest crime rate. That's also where there's a lack of housing. That's also where there's a lack of transportation and healthcare. So it is laid bare not just inadequacies in the criminal justice system and police brutality, but also all avenues of racial injustice.
Recognizing sort of that those issues that you just mentioned have a multitude of causes, factors going into them, what specifically can you and the powers that you have in your office do to address some of those?
That's precisely why when I started as a prosecutor in 2004 and on through, we created diversion programs to deal with the racial inequities and the Black and brown people in the system. We created 15 diversion programs, and to date, we have diverted over 18,000 youth and adults from the criminal justice system. So our goal was treatment, our goal was prevention, our goal was not to just put people in jail, because we've been doing that for time immemorial, and we still have a large crime problem in the United States and in Detroit and Wayne County. And so we took that unique approach. We were mocked for it at the time, and now everybody's doing that. And so again, from young sex offenders to truancy to domestic violence in the youth, we made sure we created these programs and had treatment modalities that went along with them, from mental health to drugs to homelessness and a myriad of other issues, where we kept people out of the criminal justice system and diverted them to get healthcare, to get mental health, to get aggression therapy, whatever they needed to further stay out of the criminal justice system. And we also took that to the adult side, where we had nonviolent first-time adult offenders. We also divert their cases. And if they successfully complete our program, they don't have a record at the end of that particular time. So again, these are many ways, and there are many other ways that we also look at things. Restorative justice programs, for example, that we look at. Our 24 treatment courts in Wayne County that are all designed for treatment For lower level drug offenders, for lower level offenders, period, some drug offenders, some people have mental health issues, to keep them out of the criminal justice system in the first place, and to be proactive to make sure they don't return at any time to the criminal justice system.
So we've talked some about the programs reforms that you've instituted previously. What are some specific plans that you have that you would like to implement if elected to an additional term? What's new?
Well,
What's next on the horizon?
One thing that we just started back in December, it's been about maybe 8 months now. We started a program called Talk It Out, and it's a mediated program. We partnered with Wayne County Dispute Resolution Center and the mediators there. And instead of charging someone with a crime, we mediate the solution. We started this in the juvenile court. We want to expand it to the adult court. So we're in the process of doing that before COVID-19 hit. And so we have the youth, we have their parent, and we have the victim. The catchy part of this is it can sometimes be tricky. We have to have our victim that agrees. They all get in the room, a mediation occurs. So instead of charging, we create a program for them to go through. And at the end of that program, again, they've never been charged with a crime. So we want to expand those mediated services. We also want to have wraparound services for the newly exonerated. I hope you'll ask me about our conviction integrity unit, where we've exonerated we've exonerated 19 men or granted new trials to them and have not retried them. And so we want to have wraparound services. So when someone is completing their probation, when they have been released from prison on parole, or whether they have been exonerated, we want them to have services so they will, again, with the whole idea so they don't return to the criminal justice system and there's no recidivism. So those wraparound services include housing and transportation. And the biggest piece that I'm working on now is I've already met with several colleges and universities, whether it's 4-year or 2-year, and they have agreed to give us free tuition to an exoneree that has been released from the Michigan prison system based on our programming. So those are some of the things we want to do. We also want to have, and this has been something we've been working on for a while, this would be a systematic change through our system here in Wayne County. We want to have a 24-hour warrant room. And that means where we, instead of working the regular 8:30 to 4:30, we work around the clock and we either charge or don't charge our cases. Another component is night court. And the reason why we want to do that is we want to move people in and out of the jail much faster. And so that's another thing we've been working on. And the last thing that I want to, not the last thing, another thing that I want to implement, and we've been trying to do this for a while too, because it's nice to say what you want to do, but at the same time, you have to have the resources to do so. And so we want to institute what's called a teen court, kind of a complement. We have a teen court already, where the youth decide sentences in lieu of jail for certain offenders, but we want to have a community court. So let's say there's a community in Detroit and we want to have 3 pilot programs, one on the east side, one on the west side, and one outside the city of Detroit. Let's say that community has been hit by auto thefts. The people that live there don't know when they leave their houses in the morning for work, where they're going to have a car there. And so let's say we are able to arrest and convict the person that has been stealing these cars. And so instead of jail, what we want to do is deputize, for lack of a better word, the citizens of that community to decide what happens to that particular person that stole their cars. So instead of jail, it may be you will cut the lawn, the high grass that we have in our neighborhood so our children can play there safely. You will help the senior citizens. You perhaps will change the plywood on their house. You will paint their houses. You will help clean up the neighborhood of graffiti. You will help us plant gardens. You will help us build playgrounds in the vacant fields there. You will give back to the community that you took from in lieu of going to jail or prison.
So you've talked a little bit about how you want to move to that 8-hour calendar.
Off the 8-hour calendar.
8-hour time frame. That's right. But setting that aside for a moment, in 2019, more than 60% of the people incarcerated in Wayne County jails were detained pre-trial. Now, again, you've talked about how you'd like to make decisions on whether or not to move forward with prosecution, with charging faster. But let's talk a little bit about them getting to jail in the first place. Many of the nation's top hotspots for COVID-19 outbreaks have been in correctional facilities. And in the past, you've expressed caution, skepticism about bail reform. Has COVID-19 changed your perspective on this? Oh, you're back to muted there.
I don't know how that happened, but anyway. So here, there's 2 ways to answer that question. Number one, even before COVID-19, if you know the history of the Wayne County Jail, you know that we've been under a consent decree since the 70s. And that has, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but that has mutated into administrative jail releases that occurred way before COVID-19. But since March of this year, at the beginning of March of this year, our jail population was 1,388. And I sit on a committee of people with the chief judge, attorneys for the inmates, as well as jail personnel, where we have reviewed every single case of every single person who was in the jail and reduced it by 41%. So to date, we are now under 800 people in the Wayne County Jail. And most of the people in the jail now are for capital offenses, murder mainly, sexual assault, some domestic violence, or higher level assaultive crimes. So again, that is one way. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Has
Oh, I know what it was. You said over 60 people, 60%. Well, it's one thing to understand. I don't know how it works in cities across the country, but here in Wayne County, we don't do lower level traffic offenses in my office. We don't do civil infractions. We don't do ordinance violations. And those are the cases that mainly populate the jail. So again, we do some misdemeanors. And so I am in favor of no cash bail for civil infractions, traffic offenses, except for drunk driving, for lower level, for non-assaultive misdemeanors, and for traffic offenses, I would say traffic offenses except for drunk driving and ordinance violations. And that really takes care of the large percentage of people that are in our Wayne County Jail. And by the way, those were the first categories of people that we released from the jail once COVID-19 hit.
I want to make sure I understand. There's certain categories of alleged offenders who you would keep in cash bail, but those are the people who you released after COVID-19, or do I have that?
No. I would the category that I would keep in the prison, the jail, the same category that's in there now: the murderers, the rapists, the robbers, the high level assaulted people who are a danger to the public. I believe there should be no cash bail for traffic offenses except for drunk driving, for non-assaultive misdemeanors. And I say non-assaultive misdemeanors because we have domestic violence and stalking, which can be very dangerous and has led people to lose their lives. So I can't say all misdemeanors, but certainly the vast majority of misdemeanors, except for the assaultive ones. For ordinance violations and for civil infractions, I believe there should be no cash bail. I also believe, and this is important to understand, I was a judge for almost 9 years, and I set bail. I lowered bail. I raised bail when there was a severe violation of that bail. And so I know the factors to consider. And what should be considered, which isn't considered now in all Michigan courtrooms, is that the ability to pay should be also a consideration when it comes to setting bail. No one should be in jail simply because they can't pay their bail. It has to be other things as well. Dangerousness to the public, which is very important to our victims of crime, both Black and brown. Also, the severity of the crime. If the crime has been committed before, if it's a sexual assault on a child, for example. So again, there has to be that blending global factors when setting bonds. And so again, for no cash bail for the lower level offenses that I mentioned earlier, but certainly we have to take into consideration someone's ability to pay when we look at bond conditions.
You mentioned the distinction between drunk driving and other traffic infractions. What led you to draw the line there?
Well, again, by the time it gets to our office, you have to remember there's a blend of state cases and city cases in the jail. So by the time a drunk driving case, for example, gets to us, a person was already convicted at least twice, sometimes many more times than twice before it's a felony drunk driving in Michigan. So again, if it depends on the factors of the case, it depends on if someone has 10 drunk drivings, for example, which is not unusual. I'm certainly not going to advocate for no cash bail for that person. So if it's a first-time drunk driver or a second-time drunk driver, that's a different story than if it's a serial drunk driver or a drunk driver that's actually hurt, injured, or killed someone. That's why I make that distinction.
Thank you. One thing we've seen during this pandemic is how the criminal legal system has an especially devastating impact on people experiencing homelessness or struggling with mental illness. They tend to be overrepresented in the system because jurisdictions just don't have the expertise, the resources to adequately meet their needs. If you were elected to another term, what specific additional new steps would you take to ensure that folks' mental illness or substance use or homelessness does not put them in a worse position with the criminal legal system because of who they are?
I'm going to try to answer this question as succinctly as possible. I'm a 30-year advocate for mental health. My family and I have issues in our own family where we have literally established group homes and places for people who are mentally ill and developmentally disabled to live. We have established them as a family. So I brought that with me to my history as an assistant prosecutor, as a judge, where I was very careful to make sure that anyone that was mentally ill received services before anything else. Because as you probably know, in Michigan in the 1990s, almost all of the mental health facilities were closed down, and a lot of them ended up in the criminal justice system. So as a prosecutor, we immediately partnered with the Wayne County Jail, every person that comes in that has a mental health history or a mental health history that has been discovered, we divert them sometimes, but we make sure that treatment is a part of their release or their sentence. And even treatment is a part while they're in the jail, if they are in the jail or when they're out of the jail. Where we don't do a good job is with bonders. And we've been trying for years, working with the state and different partners to have that same programming for bonders, people who either are not given cash bond, are given personal bond, or people who are not in the jail awaiting their trial. So we have to do better with services for them. I am currently working with the state because, like I said, I'm a big advocate of mental health services for children, adolescents, and adults. I've been doing this for a very long time. And I brought it to my job, every job I've had in the criminal justice system. So it is very true. There is a huge lack of resources in Michigan for people with mental health illness issues. There's a huge lack of resources for people who are found incompetent to stand trial. They physically cannot, because of their mental condition, stand trial. And we have nowhere at this point to send them. And so those are the issues I've been working on. Those are the issues I will continue to work on, focusing on the resource aspect and focusing on mental health services for bonders while they are awaiting trial. And we also, I should also mention that we are an integral part of Wayne County's mental health treatment courts. We have 3 mental health treatment courts. We have 24 treatment courts, but 3 are devoted to mental health. There's one in the juvenile division, there's one in one of our district courts, and there's also one in our 3rd Circuit Court. So we also refer our defendants to the mental health court for services as well. So we have probably 4 or 5 ways that we deal with people who have mental illness problems in the Wayne County Jail. And let me also say, because you talked about homelessness, I am on the committee, as I said, that is a part of releasing people from the Wayne County Jail due to COVID. The judge actually makes the final decision and we make recommendations. But the one thing that we do is we don't release anyone from the jail that is homeless or has a mental health issue without finding somewhere for them to go. Because if someone is mentally ill and homeless and they're at least getting their medication in the jail, we don't want them in the jail because of COVID, but we don't want to set them in the street so they can't get any services as well. So we take a lot of time, attention, and effort to make sure we have service providers for them to go to so they can continue to get those services but be outside the jail. Or if they are homeless, that they have someplace to stay. And once they are released from the jail. And that's critically important. We don't want to release someone from the jail and find them in a worse position than they were in the jail.
I want to turn now to this national conversation that we've been having about police violence, particularly impacting communities of color. In many cases, we see that police unions are a big factor in the way reform goes forward. The power, the persuasion of police unions frequently prevent officer accountability and foster secrecy around police practices, and officers' histories. So the common understanding seems to be, right, that there's this prosecutorial reliance on police officers who are members of police unions that deter prosecutors sometimes from challenging the culture of those departments. And we're seeing across the country, there have been calls to disentangle this close relationship, as well as calls for elected prosecutors like yourself to reject financial contributions from police unions. Wondering what your position on this is. Do you accept contributions from police unions? And if you do—
I never have. In fact, it's interesting because I never received support from police unions at first. Because like I said, I prosecuted that case back in 1993 where 2 police officers went to prison for killing an unblack motorist. So it took a very long time and a lot of development of relationships because we must have these relationships with police when you are a prosecutor. I have never taken any money from a police union ever, not one dime. And then I am endorsed by our Wayne County Chiefs of Police, most of them are very progressive, and they also have no problem working with me on police issues and police reform and police brutality. But it's also important to know that they know that if one of their officers commits misconduct, whether it be sexual misconduct or whether it be police beatings or whether it be fraud or embezzlement, they know that the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office will try and convict those officers. We have charged over 70 officers just in the last few years of police misconduct. One of them was a police beating in 2015 where a police officer who had been fired from Detroit and 2 other Wayne County police departments were working for another department and again, had a bogus traffic stop and physically beat an African-American motorist, not to death, he survived, but that officer we convicted as an office and he went to prison. So my office is the only one in the state that has a dedicated unit of 8, I think it's 8 or 9 prosecutors that do this all the time, 24/7. It's called Public Integrity Unit. They prosecute police misconduct on a daily basis. They prosecute elected officials or people of positions of authority on a daily basis. And they also prosecute cases where police officers are shot and killed. That is what they specialize in. They're specially trained. And again, we have prosecuted over 70 officers just in the last few years because we are not afraid to do it. So I know there are a lot of my colleagues across the state and in my state are afraid to prosecute police. In Wayne County, we're not afraid to do that. We never have. We have always had that unit. It is always very active.
You mentioned that you have the endorsement of the city's police chief, and I want to just broaden.
I have the endorsement of the Wayne County Chiefs of Police, which includes most of the police chiefs of Wayne County, and we work with them on a daily basis. Not on a daily basis. We work with them all the time. We have conversations with them on police reform all the time. We have conversations set up to come because of what has happened to George Floyd. They know that we're very serious about police brutality. They know my stance that there should be a statewide database that lists officers who commit misconduct. And I'll just name one more thing that they also know is that they know that I think that police should be mandatory reporters. I don't know if you know that teachers and coaches are mandatorily ordered to report child abuse when it comes to children. So I think police should be added to that list as well. They should be mandated to report any kind of police misconduct, because the police misconduct that we see are the ones that are captured on video. We don't see the ones, we don't see it all. We don't see the ones that take place inside the police car. We don't see the ones that may take place inside the precinct walls. So I think that police officers should be mandatorily forced to let us know that exists. So I have a number of other issues that we've been working on police reform for years. The problem is people weren't always listening, but now it's different. People are listening. People are listening, and I really think this is now the chance that there's going to be some real reform, at least in my state and hopefully across the country. And we've been leaders in that effect for years.
Those law enforcement endorsements that you mentioned, did those entail any financial support or no?
No, I have not received it. Like I said, I have not received any financial support from any police union ever.
I understand, and I just want to make sure that we're not just talking about unions, but also members of police departments, law enforcement officials.
No, I have not received any money from any law enforcement that I know of from any law enforcement official. And so it's also, so the answer is no.
Thanks. I want to turn now to juvenile sentencing. Michigan has more people serving juvenile life sentences than anywhere else in the country, and Wayne County is responsible for the largest number of juvenile life sentences in the state. And the harsh treatment we've seen of young people isn't always limited to life sentences. Last year, your office charged a 10-year-old boy with aggravated assault during a dodgeball game. The story received national coverage, and the charges were eventually dropped. But at the time, you defended the charges as sustainable. So my question is, how do you look back on that incident? Should cases involving juveniles accused of crimes, should those be treated the same as cases involving adults?
I don't believe I ever said the charges were sustainable, because as soon one of my assistants charged that case, and it was a mistake. And as soon as I found out about it, within 24 hours, that case was dismissed. So I never called that case sustainable. So I don't know where that information comes from. As far as juvenile lifers, Michigan does have the largest amount. In Wayne County, I believe we have 149 in Wayne County, and only 5 under my administration. But still, I was responsible for making sure that we followed the dictates of the Michigan Supreme Court. And so we're the top office, one of the top offices in the country that have taken place, certainly in the state. We have now already done 95 of them. We have, I believe it's 40 something left to do. We have even done one hearing during the COVID crisis, done by Zoom. Everybody agreed to have it done that way. And the only reason we have 40 plus still left is we have to go by the schedule of the judge, the way the judge sets the case, the way that the defense attorney, their availability. Sometimes they want to bring in experts, and we have to wait for the experts' availability. So we have not in any way hampered the progress of these cases. And it's also important to notice that one of the reasons why Michigan had the most is because our law, that's been changed now, our law was that anyone under the age of 17 is an adult. So if they were lawfully convicted as an adult at age 17, then that was what the law was. So now the Supreme Court opinion included all 17-year-olds, and that's the reason why we had so many. But we have already taken care of over 95 of these, and we stand ready to proceed on all the rest of them as well. So again, we are not holding anything up. We are making sure that these cases are done as expeditious as we can. But again, we have to wait for other people's schedules other than ours.
Thanks. And I just want to clear that up. The sustainable language came from the Washington Post coverage of your decision to dismiss the case. I'm reading Wayne County Prosecuting Attorney Kim Worthy said in a news release that although the charge was certainly sustainable, she instructed her staff to dismiss the case. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I don't recall ever saying that, but I don't recall ever saying that. But anyway, I did, it's within 24 hours of the case being dismissed. And let me, so that's really all I can say. What I understand, we have what we call Right Track program. And so I think the intent of the APL, although I can't get into her mind, was to put him into that Right Track program where there would be no record, where there would be services provided if needed, as determined by a judge. But again, so once I found out about it, I thought it was inappropriate that the charging occurred. And within 24 hours of me finding out, we dismissed it. And that's the mark of a leader. I take responsibility for that because one of my prosecutors did charge that case, so it falls on me. And so I'm the one that made the decision to dismiss it, and that's what happened.
Thanks. I want to ask briefly about the Detroit Police's drug unit, which has been dogged by allegations of corruption,
yes.
Including stories of officers lying to prosecutors, robbing dealers, and sometimes embezzling funds meant to pay informants, excuse me. Acknowledging, like we discussed earlier, sort of the necessarily close relationship between law enforcement and prosecutors' offices, what's your opinion on how something like that should be dealt with?
Yeah, and let me just also add, because I forgot to mention this during my last answer, 61 of our juvenile lifers have been released already, and that's more than the entire rest of the state combined. In any event, I'm sorry, ask your question one more time. I'm very sorry.
That's all right. The drug unit and its corruption.
Oh, the drug unit, yes.
So how do you think the prosecutors should work with that?
Yeah, we've been working directly with a couple of federal agencies, as well as the Detroit Police Department. James Craig, who is the Detroit Police Chief, does not have any issues with making sure that wrongful police officers that do wrongful things are not on his department. So far we have been advised of what is going on. It's an ongoing investigation, but we have already exonerated 3 men that were convicted by police officers who had false affidavits to search warrants, had false search warrants, lied about the evidence that they found. And so those stand among our exonerees as well. And so we will not hesitate to make sure that people are released. If in fact we find that this is a strict pattern and this is what's being investigated, we may even take more dire steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again. When this investigation is done, I expect that there will be police officers charged by my office. But again, this is an ongoing sweeping investigation.
Is charging officers, is that what you mean by more dire steps?
Well, yes, that and more, depending on what I've been briefed on so far. There are some very serious allegations that I think that we may be able to prove, and there will certainly be charges that come from that. I will not hesitate to charge a police officer, as I've tried to say many times during this interview, if the wrongdoings occurred. In fact, like I said, during this investigation, if we find out a police officer has in fact done wrong, we have already stepped in and wrongfully and exonerated that person. So we are now looking for patterns of what's occurring. We have a number of police officers that have been convicted by the federal government, and we're certainly pulling all their cases and looking at their cases as well. So this is very expansive. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and there is going to be a serious outcome, I think, from when this investigation is completed. But if we find during this investigation that a police officer has been a part of wrongfully convicting somebody, we will exonerate them, and we have already done that 3 times.
Thanks. We've touched a little bit on exonerations, and I want to go into that in a little bit more detail. So Michigan ranks 5th in the nation for wrongful convictions that have been overturned. And between 1989 and 2016, there were 31 people who were exonerated from Wayne County, more than anywhere else in the state. One notable case was Devontae Sanford, for our viewers who aren't familiar, he was charged with homicide as a 14-year-old. He was incarcerated for 9 years until his exoneration after the murderer confessed to the crime. After he was released from prison, he couldn't get his name cleared because your office wouldn't admit fault in proceeding with the prosecution. And in 2016, you said about it, and I'm quoting here, "I don't know that what we could have done differently as this case went through time. I really don't," end quote. Has your perspective on that case changed since then? What if
this case is a stark example of, despite what any of my personal opinions would be, once we found that there had been wrongfulness with the police investigation, we made sure that he was freed. And so this is what prosecutors are supposed to do, and this is what I'm not afraid to do. So again, despite any of my personal opinions about this case, that doesn't stand in the way of us doing the right thing. Once we found out that there were problems, and that's not strong enough a word, in the police investigation, especially with one particular officer who happened to be later a command officer, we had to make sure that we dismissed the case because there was a lot of wrongdoing by the police department in that case.
What policy changes, more broadly speaking, would you implement to address the prevalence of wrongful convictions like this one?
Well, the one thing that I did, and we have been trying to do it since about 2006, 2007, maybe earlier than that, when I met one of my fellow prosecutors in Dallas, Texas, who started one of the first conviction integrity units, and we started right then and there trying to get the funding for it. Again, you want to do something, but you have to make sure you have the funding. So finally, 2.5 years ago, I was able to convince the Wayne County Commission and the Wayne County Executive to fund this unit to the tune of about $750,000. We went back to them about 6 or 7 months ago. I can't remember if it was the beginning of this year or the end of last year, because we need to double the size of the unit. So we hope that that's still under consideration despite the problems of COVID. We started this unit because I said that no prosecutor's office, I've been saying this since 2006, should be afraid to look back at their old convictions and correct any mistakes, even if it didn't happen on my watch. And so we were finally able to get that. I hired one of the nationwide experts to run that unit. This has been her life's work. Her name is Valerie Newman. Our unit has now been cited as one of the best in the country now. The Wayne County, we do 60% of the cases. And so of course we have 60%, we have more cases than anybody else. But we're also the only county in Michigan to invite people to send us their cases if they have any credible claims of innocence. And so of course, once we invite people to do so, we're gonna have more cases. And so we have looked at approximately 1,200 cases that have been sent to us. We have cleared about 700 of those. We have about 500 that we're still looking at now, which is why I need the size of the unit doubled. We have 7 people that work full-time in the unit now. We have 1 volunteer that works part-time in the unit. And again, if we had more people, we'd be able to get to these convictions, get to these cases much faster. They're exhaustive evaluations and examinations that you can imagine. And again, our work has led to the exoneration or new trials for 19 people. And so we continue to do this work every day. We're not afraid to do it. We invite people to solicit people to send cases to our office for us to look at. And that's why we have the numbers that we do. Not because we have more wrongful convictions than anybody else. We do more cases than anybody else.
When you look back at, thank you. When you look back at Mr. Sanford's conviction, which occurred while you were in office,
Yes.
What do you think you would have done differently? When do you think you should have been aware of what was going on with that?
Well, when we found out about the police investigation, that's when we should have been first aware of it.
Thanks. I want to turn to asking you about the prosecutor's relationship with the Wayne County immigrant community. There's about just shy of 150,000 immigrants estimated who live in Wayne County. And in addition to what the pandemic has showed us, the criminal legal system has a tremendous impact on how immigrant communities interact with federal agencies and more specifically with the Trump administration. In your view, what should a prosecutor's role be in the enforcement of federal immigration law? Well,
let me tell you what we have done. Soon after I got into office, and we've had 2 of these, we had 2 roundtables, and we brought in academics that were experts in immigration law. We brought in lawyers that were experts in immigration law because there was no settled policy. With the federal government, we weren't able to find a settled policy. It seemed to change every 5 minutes. And so what we were attempting to do was to get a list of crimes where we could either someone could plead guilty to or be charged with where they didn't force deportation. And so we did that twice. And so it's very, very frustrating. So what we end up doing, what we do now is we have 1 person in the office who's responsible for a consistent policy. Every defense attorney knows who this is. They can bring cases to them, and they do. For us to look at a crafting of a plea or a case or a sentence to make sure that they are not deported. So I am actually supported by, in Wayne County, as you say, is one of the most diverse counties in the United States outside of LA and New York. We have more Arab Americans, for example, than any place else outside the Middle East. I am heavily supported by all of our immigrant communities because they know that my office will go that extra step to make sure that defendants are aware of the collateral consequences of pleading guilty when they are immigrants, and we have prosecutors who will work with them to try to craft sentences for them so they won't get deported. Obviously, we don't do this when it comes to rape, murder, and our capital offenses, but we will do it for every other crime to make sure that this is not an impediment to the plea in the first place. And we have one person who's responsible, so we have a consistent policy throughout the office, and who defense attorneys know that this is who they go to handle these cases.
Last question for you. Excuse me. We're at a point right now where people are scrutinizing maybe more closely than ever the role of the police, prosecutors, and the criminal legal system in American society. How do you think your candidacy for another term as prosecutor fits into this particular moment?
Well, I think it fits into it for many reasons. First of all, they know that we deal with the question that you just had before you is one reason. They know that I will prosecute police with, and I don't have any problem doing that. They know that will happen. They know that we have special programming for people of the LGBTQ community. We're the only office in the country that has a specific program to handle victims from the LGBT community. They know that we have policies that when it deals with the immigrant community. They know that we have policies that deal with diverting people out of the criminal justice system. Like I said, we have 18,000 that we have diverted out of the system, both in the criminal court, in the juvenile court, and in the adult court. They know that we will look at racial disparity issues. They know that we'll look at any issue, that when we look at any case, unless it's a murder case or something like that, when we look at the case with the idea of diverting them, or making sure they get the proper treatment that they need, whether it's mental health treatment or treatment for veterans or homelessness court or sobriety court or drug court. They know that we look at every case with that particular attitude. They know that even if we end up charging the case, that we will still work with the attorneys to make sure that treatment is first and that we can make sure to divert them as well. And so we have always had those policies. We have always been very open about that. We have always had people that have specialized and trained. We also deal with special cases of elder abuse. So basically every population, we have a elder abuse unit where we deal with crimes against the elderly. And so from child abuse to elder abuse to vulnerable adults to people with mental illness to people who are physically incapacitated to people from the immigrant community to people from the LGBT community to looking at our programs who are treatment-based and based on proactivity. And that's how we handle our cases. We do not rack up cases just to see how many numbers we can charge. That's not what we do. That's not what we have ever done. So again, people know we have this programming in place. They know the things that we talked about earlier about what I want to do going forward, and that we want a fair office. And also they know, and this is critical, they know that I have the experience to run this office. I am not 6 years out of law school. I am not a person that has only done about 20 cases in my entire career. I am someone who has done thousands and thousands of cases. I have served as an assistant prosecutor. I have served as a judge. I run a budget of $44 million a year. I have delivered 15 straight balanced budgets. So and on top of that, in our program, I'm a true believer. I have character and integrity, and I try to be as honest as I can. I do not lie about my record, as others have done regularly during this campaign. And I'm a proven and bold and fearless leader. And we haven't even talked about our campaign against the over 11,000 rape kits that were found abandoned in a police warehouse that we took the helm. We received convictions. We have taken 215 rapists off the street. We have identified over 825 serial rapists just within the city of Detroit. And so again, the program that we had has shown that Detroit's also a national leader there. So people copy our programming all across this country, and we continue to do whatever we can to make sure that we bring justice to the citizens of Wayne County.
Thank you, Ms. Worthy. That's all the time we have today for our Wayne County Prosecutor Forum. To the voters, a reminder, primary election day is Tuesday, August 4th. And if you're voting by mail, that ballot must be received, not postmarked, by 8 p.m. on election day. So be sure to get it in a couple days early. Thank you again to Ms. Worthy for joining us, and to everyone watching. Have a great afternoon.